My name is Burns Brady. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. Uh, you just don't say no in AA. Well, in most circumstances, over the years that I've been around, I think that is a wonderful thing to say, but there are times that no is the right answer if my sponsor and God agree with that. But this is one where it wasn't even close. Liz called, and I don't know that I've ever said no to Liz ever since we've known each other. And you just, it's just one of those things you do. And she called and asked if I would come up here, and I was glad to do it. And for those of you who know Roger H., I'm telling you the truth when nobody takes Roger's place. I'm up here substituting because he's hurt. I didn't talk with him about 4 or 5 days ago, but talked to somebody that he sponsors, and he's going to be all right, but he's having a tough time with that injury that he's had. It's been really tough. So I'm just grateful to be up here in this place. Also, when Liz called, she said, Burns said, you've spoken up here before, so we're looking forward to you coming back. And I'm sitting there thinking, never spoken up there before. And I thought, well, Liz is getting old. So, I mean, I'm not lying. I mean, I may lie about a few things in this story, but I ain't lying about this. And I said, Liz is getting old, so I'd be glad to see her and hear her, and I'll just go on up there. So I came up here and sat down and got out the list of speakers, and I'll be damned. There I was in 1990. And unless all of you got together and printed that as a mistake just to see if I'd just break down, of course, Mo brought me up here because I didn't know how to get here. Don't remember how I got here. What I do remember is the church. And I wish that I'd been older at that time so I could have really appreciated the ambiance of just walking in and seeing where we are. I mean, this is just absolutely beautiful. In 1991, I can tell you I was almost certainly more tied up with how I was going to look and what I was going to say than I am tonight. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still tied up with how I look, kind of what I'm going to say, but I'm not as tied up tonight as I was in 1991. So some things change very slowly, and that's the way it is. So and I found out that Liz is not the one that's having the problem. Oh, good God. Anyway, it's good to be here. It's good. I'll tell you what, there's many, many people, and if you've been in around a long time, maybe just a medium amount of time, you'll relate to this. And if you haven't been, then there'll be a day when you will, if you're blessed and dedicated and surrendered to stay in here and get to know so many people. And then some of them will leave, some of them will go. And the poignant pain of not seeing some of those people that I saw for a number of years when I would come up into southern Indiana and talk. I miss them. And I'm just grateful that they were in my life. And the ones that are still here, I'm just grateful you're still here. 2 or 3 have come up, and we just kind of looked at each other and hugged each other. And then I'm sure as they walked off, they thought, shit, when did he get that old, I didn't think that about them. But what a great joy to be here, and what a privilege. And I'll do the best I can to do the job that I've been given to do and the privilege to do. That is, tell you what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I was born in a little town in western Kentucky named Mayfield. I grew up in a home where there was no alcohol and there were no drugs. My grandfather, for whom I'm named, died drinking bleach in the Mayfield City Jail in 1934. He was the town drunk. My mother was molested physically, emotionally, and sexually in that home. He died in 34, and I was born in maybe 35, but I was born in 36, so I never knew him. My mother never had a chance to deal successfully with the rage and the anger and the pain and the guilt and the shame. Today in therapeutic language, we call her an adult child of an alcoholic. And some of us who've been around a long time say, well, we don't really like to think in those terms. Well, you read the first page of the chapter of the family afterward, and said if you're around one of us, you get neurotic. And my mother was one of the finest people I've ever known in my life. I adored her. She died very prematurely at age 64 of cancer. Died in 1978. I absolutely doted on her, and I think of her every day multiple times. Uh, there's no way for me to explain how much I love that woman. But my mother never had a chance to deal with those things, and she was what I call goofy. Mother was kind of like me. She was almost wired for sound. I've been labeled in many diagnostic circles as a fundamental impulse disorder. Right. All you got to do is go to an AA meeting and see a whole damn room full of impulse disorder. And I mean, that's just what it is. And Mama she would be sitting here at one spot and go from 0 to 100 in about 2 seconds. And so do I. And she never had a program that we have for each other that pause when agitated or doubtful. I'm getting better. I'm still getting better. I'm nowhere near where I think I'll get to be when I get too damn slow and old to be able to figure out what it is I'm pissed off about. But nevertheless, I am getting better. But Mama was that way and I'm that way. And it's not the disease. It's pretty much in the same gene pool where that's just the way we are. I had an uncle named for the grandfather, and I wasn't named for him. His name was Burns also. And he was married to Aunt Irene, and at the end of World War II, they got a divorce. And at the end of World War II, I was 12 years old. I was 9 years old. And Irene he had a construction company, and she got the construction company in the divorce. Well, he had, I don't know how many trucks he had. I don't know whether he had 3 or whether he had 30 trucks. But I know when I was listening to Mother and Daddy talk, they said when the divorce was final, Uncle Burns went down and got in each one of those trucks and drove them into the Detroit River. One at a time, drove every damn one of them into the Detroit River. And when they were telling that story, I'm sitting there thinking, that's the coolest bitch I've ever seen. I mean, I hope I grow up just like him. Well, I did. No trucks and no Detroit River, but I got my own, Anyway, so Mama, when I grew up in Mayfield, nobody even knew my grandfather. I mean, there was no association as far as I knew. There really wasn't. But Mother always felt that everybody knew her as the daughter of Pound Grump. I was her hero child, if you will. She lived vicariously through me. I had a lot of energy. I was bright. I was a good kid. I was fun and happy to be around, even as a little kid. And Mother lived through me. And when I was perfect, sang and danced and stood on a mark, Mother patted my butt, parted my hair, and made me King Baby, the top of the pile. I found out kind of accidentally what could happen is that when I made a B when I was in the 3rd grade, Mama didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. She didn't scream at me. She didn't do anything. She ignored me. Obviously made an indelible impression in my mind because I remember thinking, by God, that's the last B I get. And I didn't. For 12 years, I only had 1 B. The rest were A's. That's where I learned about the idea of conditional love. You give somebody everything they want, they'll take care of you and make you feel special, especially women. So that was my mama. And it took an awful lot of whiskey and an awful lot of recovery and an awful lot of therapy for me to ever figure out that that is not the way a male-female relationship is going to grow up. But when I was drinking out there, I would find me a woman that I would give her everything that I could give her, and then I handed her script, and she had to do this. And a lot of the crazy ones stayed a long time. Yeah. And you had 2 crazy people just having a hell of a time, Now, the sane ones took about once or twice at that, and they just walked off, and said, I'm out of here. I'm not doing that. But that's the way that's when I first learned about conditional love. Perfection. Bill Wilson, in the second best thing that he ever wrote for me, first thing is the big book. The second thing was a thing he wrote in 1958 for the Grapevine called emotional sobriety. And in that, he said all of his problems stem from money, power, prestige, sex, the need for approval. The need. I've held men in my lap big enough to eat that wall out at the prisons, listening to their fifth steps. And they're finally, for the first time, trusting a man to tell them stuff they've never told. And what they're wanting from me and what they're terrified about is that I'm either going to laugh at them, walk away from them, tell them, get away, you're crazy SOB, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And I mean, they have just gotten right there and fallen off and done it. And I rub the back of their head and tell them my story. I rub the back of their head and tell them I love them. I rub the back of their head and tell them that let's go on from here. We got 7 more steps to do. It's going to be the victory that's going to be there, and you won't be held prisoner by this any longer, if my experience means anything. But that overwhelming need for approval led to the drive for perfection. And when I got to AA, it was the first place I'd ever been where when I came in, you said you don't have to be perfect, and that's good because you can't be perfect. And we're going to give you a whole set of rules and tools to deal with the fact that you can't be perfect. The first, and it's still been hard as hell for me to accept one day at a time, following this drill that I will talk about, that I can live with my imperfections and not expect perfections, not only of me, but of you. But of you. And the resentments that I feel when you don't step up to the line. You can be a sponsee. Thank God for this program and sponsors and the whole thing that's there to get to that point that I no longer, very rarely, sit in judgment of your imperfections or even mine. And that's a hell of a victory. Second place I learned about conditional love was the church. Now, I got to tell you, I'm a devout member of the church. I grew up where I had a string of medals for 12 years and I never missed Sunday school church because Mama went to church. And that's where she found whatever freedom she found. And she took me with her, and Daddy and my brother went to another church, but all 4 of us would meet for lunch, and everybody was at peace with each other about church. But Mama took me to church with her. And what I heard in church growing up was it's better to spill your seeds, and since it's of young people, it's better to spill your seeds in the belly of a prostitute than it is on the ground. Now, I'm 12 years old. And I'm maturing like any 12-year-old. I'm not going for cheap humor. I don't know of any other way to say it. I guess I could not say it at all, but I'm going to say it because it's part of the deal. I'm 12 years old and I've just found a new pull toy, right? And I am torn every day between this going to hell or getting relief. Now, it's more than just kind of a funny story. You know, we're irritable, restless, and discontented. We don't get that way. We're born that way. Now, I'm an addiction specialist, a doctor who has practiced addiction medicine at the top level for the last 25 years of a 45-year medical career. In the 1990s and the unfolding 2000s that taught us about this brain that Silkworth was telling us we had, and we finally now scientifically have shown it. We're irritable, restless, discontented, and we drink for the effect. You say, well, yeah, I feel better. Yeah, but it's just not because it smells good. It changes our brain chemistry and makes it even super normal. From the fact that we're walking around subnormal and we're feeling anxious and depressed, which is our mood disorders, which is irritable, restless, discontented. And I'll tell you the other thing that damn near floods the brain with the same chemistry is orgasm. Why do you think there's so many people that fall off the train? Because they start getting into bed with people they don't know. They're lucky if they know their first name. They sure as hell don't know their last name. And it ain't just because they're slovenly or not in good order with Jesus. May not be. But the fact is they're going for relief. They're going for relief. And masturbation did that for me then. At 12 years of age. At 12 years of age, I found the relief. Now, being in a circumstance, being in a situation environmentally, I would go down every Sunday and I would confess my sins, and I got baptized virtually every Sunday night. And I'm grateful because the church I was in didn't have confession. So I might have done something bad to myself, because I mean, this stuff was really stacking up on me. Remember the shame and the guilt at the end of the drinking and the drugging? Well, that's where I was with that sort of behavior, because I felt like a dirty little boy. And I had people telling me I was a dirty little boy. And what I was a normal little boy who was really screwed up about the conditional love that I was hearing from that particular church. I'm not talking about the Church Universal. I'm talking about that church. When I came back from treatment, my best friend, next door neighbor, was an Episcopal priest. We played golf together. We drank beer together. He was a football coach who had a major spiritual experience in the Korean conflict, came home, went to seminary. And I mean, he loved his God and he loved his church, but he loved playing golf and drinking beer. And I watched him miss a 3-foot putt, and I stand back like, I thought I could cuss. My God, you know? Then he would make his amends to us and walk over to the next tee, miss one on the next thing, and do it again, you know? But he made religion alive. And I came home and I said, Jimmy, take me back to my church. He said, I can do that, Burns. He said, but you got to go to AA. They have better success with alcoholics than we do. But I administered the chalice and the host and was a lay reader in that church for 8.5 years, going to 5 to 7 AA meetings a week. My wife hooked right at my belt, and there were 5 other men with their wives, and we ran Mo knew 'em. We ran together. I mean, Jim, and Fritz. We ran together like little thieves. We'd cook out on weekends with our wives. I mean, we were up to here in the fellowship and loved it. We weren't up to here in the steps, but I'll tell you about that later on. But we had an incredible fellowship, an incredible experience in the church for me. And at 8.5 years, my priest asked me, he said, Burns, I think you're at a point where we need to meet on Saturday. And Casey and I and my sponsor and Jim met. He said, we need to pray today to find out where God wants you to be. You can't continue to be this deep in church. I'm not telling you to get away from church, but I was on the vestry. I was in the choir. Casey and I were running young people, and I was 5 to 7 meetings. I was sponsoring people. I was running all over the country talking at that time. And it was just, I mean, I was burning up. And we sat down, and he said, I think your ministry will be in AA. If it's revealed to be different, okay. Now we call it service, but it's still a ministry. And he said, I think your ministry will be in AA. He said, I hope you'll continue to go to church, but you just need to get off the vestry and quit doing these things and see if God can't use you better there. So I got down and played at 5'9" again rather than 6'10", which has always been my problem. And it just always is, especially if I'm committed to something like the church and to AA, which I have been. But the second place I learned about conditional love was the church. You do this or you go to hell. That's where I first began to know the only way to get to heaven was to be perfect for God. To be perfect for mama and to be perfect for God. Through the program of AA, I found the answer to both of those. And the peace that came from knowing that's just a false spot to be in. At least it was for me, and it is for the people I sponsor. Now, all this didn't make me an alcoholic, but it did produce the thinking. And I was taught when I came in, and our book is absolutely riffed with multiple allusions to the fact that the problem of the alcoholic lies in his mind, the way he thinks. If we didn't take the first drink, then there wouldn't be a problem. And why do we take the first drink? Because of the peculiar mental twist. And the peculiar mental twist is what we use when we're not in fit spiritual condition. Read Jim's story. Comes in pissed off. In the 30s. Middle of the Depression. He's got a job. Nobody had a job. I was born in 36, and my daddy would get on a milk truck and ride over to Murray State and rake the leaves and mow the yards. That was the only job he could find. We ate off of crate boxes until the middle of World War II. Everybody was poor. And that's what it was. Jim's got a job. Now, he drank it away, but they hired him back. He comes in and gets pissed off at his boss. So he's got a resentment, totally self-centered, maybe lying because he gets to work on Tuesday, but it may be Labor Day. We're going to give him that. But he comes in with at least two of the big four: self-centeredness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. We see it in the 4th step, revisiting the 10th step, revisiting the 11th step, all a part of the day of establishing and maintaining and putting to bed my spiritual condition. I talk a lot about the book because I lived for 10 years in this program and never read it because I wasn't taught to. I don't have a resentment about it. I'm just reporting. Then creating some of the most self-centered stuff that you could ever imagine. If I had time, I'll go into it. I was led into the book, and for the last 25 years, I've led a 12-step program. And I got to tell you, a 12-step program is far superior to a 3-step program. And I remember when I finally got it, I said to God, come on, why'd you leave my ass out here? Why did you leave me out here? I love you. I love you with all of my heart. Why did you leave me here? I felt his voice say, son, you may impress a lot of people with what you know, but you'll help heal a lot of people with your experience. Don't ever give a talk that you don't tell people the difference between a 12-step program and a 3-step program based on your experience. And that's what I'm doing. What you do with it's you. But I've done what I made a promise to do. Now, I'm an alcoholic because I'm bodily different. Now, Jim goes through all this peculiar mental twist deal till he finally puts scotch in milk, and we all say, you're such an idiot. I've done the same thing. It just wasn't scotch in milk. You go back and look at what we've each done, you think, woo, man, I really had to stretch that dude to ever have that make sense. But it does make sense going for relief of pure physiological brain pharmacology deal relieved by alcohol and other drugs. Virtually every time until it quits working. And then what was the medicine becomes the devil. And then I had to deal with the devil to get that away from me so I could deal with the original problem, which was my lack of a spiritual solution to life. Every problem I've got today is a second half of the 1st step problem. Every problem I've got is the second half of the 1st step problem. Every solution I've got is a 12-step solution to my absolute obsession and need and fear of having to control the outcome of everything or the behavior of everybody. Somebody's with a red light and it turns green, they honk at me. I'm in conflict with them till the next red light. I understand that back in the day, but I'm 77 years old and 35 years sober, and the first time there's a honk, up goes my finger. That's better than when it used to be. I flew the door open and I went by and I didn't give a damn who was in that vehicle behind me. I got to where I started to look first, I ain't big enough to quit looking because somebody usually got whipped and it's me. But by God, it never seemed to matter. Open the door back there, right in their face. I mean, and it goes through everything. My wife, my children, everybody. My first impulse is to make sure that under the benevolent attitude of can I help you, that I get you where I want you. But this is all in the book. The actors controlling the stage, if we only manage well. 1st step problem with a 12-step solution. We're born deficient in some major brain chemicals. And when we drink and drug, they correct themselves. It's that simple. The 1990s was called the decade of the brain. With better methodology and better paradigms, they studied and found out the brain chemistry. What is going on now is the unfolding of the human genome. We right now we're inches away from doing stuff that is both incredibly stimulating and terrifying. In the field of addiction, it will give us virtually every answer, including being able to make a 100% correct diagnosis on a newborn. When that child is born in the newborn nursery, they can do what they will do, sequence their DNA and say this child will be an alcoholic or drug addict if they ever drink or drug. And 1 inch away from being able to change that child's brain chemistry. And many of you in this room are young enough you'll see it. I'm glad I'm too old to be here. The only reason for my story is because I do this in the prisons. I do it at the homeless shelters. I do it everywhere that I can go to let people know we have a disease, which is what Silkworth said. What he told Wilson to quit preaching and say, we have a disease. Now, the big book says an illness or a malady, but Silkworth said a disease. And he told Wilson to quit preaching, tell them they have a disease. All we could tell them was they had an allergy. But for sure, that was a brilliant diagnosis, because all Silkworth meant was these people drinking, they don't act like normal people. So it must be an allergy. Well, today we know it's more involved than just even the subspecialty of allergy, but it is flat a disease. And we didn't cause it except by drinking and drugging. We are flat born with the genetic predisposition. And thank God for AA to help me deal with everything I've done since I was born to screw up my life. But I'm absolutely certain my first resentment came in the delivery room. And we're right now absolutely getting the imprint that cognitively that newborn's brain is making an imprint on what it feels and sees. And what does it see? Floating fine, no problem, fed, warm, everything's perfect. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. Lights are everywhere. People are screaming. They're holding me by my feet, busting me on my ass. And that's supposed to make me feel good, right? And then they take me over to the newborn nursery and they won't feed me on time. Oh, we're already getting resentment. And what Wilson say? He didn't know that, but he said, we go back through our lives. Nothing counts but thoroughness and honesty. I don't think I'll go back through my life. Hear this all the time, people I'm sponsoring. All I have to do is the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. That's over. No, you go back there and look at it. You may be surprised what you find. If you don't find anything, you'll get a better chance to use the mechanics. Jack Sullivan was my second sponsor, and y'all know Jack. He was the first speaker up here. Many of you don't. I'm sorry you never got to know him. Hell of a guy. Sullivan says, I'm going to get you to a point, and I was 12 years or 11 years sober when I got with Jack. Didn't have the steps. Complete commitment to the program. So he said, I'm going to have you where you can do a complete full step by the time you get from one red light to the next one. He said, then I want you to call me before you get to the next red light and tell me what sort of a fool you made of yourself. But you'll get to that point, I did, of those mechanics once you learn the process of going through that, and it'll be intriguing. At least it is for me, and maybe that's not the right word, but it's intriguing to go back through and begin to see the product of me from the things that went on. As long as I don't use those as excuses, I got a chance to really be something special in God's army. As long as I stay a victim of them, I got no shot to even stay sober. Now, I haven't had to drink, but I've been crazy enough times that the only reason I didn't drink was because it had quit working for me, and I knew it would be an absolute waste of time to drink. Tried sex. That didn't work. Tried everything that you can try. Money, prestige, everything. Nothing worked until a spiritual solution is the result of these steps. That's what makes me an alcoholic. Stop the drinking, don't deal with the thinking. And for you people who are young, never forget this. It's in the book. You'll find it if you go there. I pray to God you go there, or your sponsor leads you there. And it sounds like that's what's coming out of this community. Go through that process, you'll find it. Problem of the alcoholic lies in his mind and the thinking we will do to feel normal, when whatever it is we feel just doesn't seem to fit. Alcohol and drugs are no problem for me in high school. They're no problem for me in college. I had drank beer in high school. A bunch of us would go down and listen to the gospel quartets in Western Kentucky. Then we'd come home with a couple of beers in us and play Monopoly. And that's what we did. Drugs were not around. In college, I got drunk sometimes. I'd go over to parties and drink some beer, sometimes some whiskey, but it just wasn't. There never was that indelible imprint in my brain of, wow, we have a moment of clarity. Well, we have a moment when we change and we'll never be the same again with alcohol and drugs. Sometimes it is absolutely so florid, as it was in my case, that you say, wow, that's when my whole life changed. Started my freshman year in medical school. I went to medical school in 1958 at the University of Louisville. I was flying apart. The dean came in the first day. There were 100 of us in the class. He walked up for us. He said, there are 100 of you in this class. Only 75 will graduate. If there are 100 A's, the low 25 A's will flunk. Look at the man next to you, because he may not be here next year. And I turned around, looked at him. He was looking right back at me. I thought, oh my God, it's me. It's irritable, restless, discontented. And I'm sitting there trying to get ready for that gross anatomy exam. And one of the upperclassmen I'd been in college with came down and had this little pill. And he handed it to me and he said, take this. It'll help you to stay awake, to focus, to study. The pill called Desoxin, which is as close to commercial meth as we had in the 50s and 60s. Meth wasn't around. Those cocaine, they were there, but they weren't here. It was not a player. And neither were those drugs that kept us awake. But I took that Desoxin and my whole world changed. My brain has never forgotten it. Everything that we ever do is stored in our brain in a particular area. And under certain conditions, those thoughts can be brought up. That's what PTSD is. That's what post-euphoric recall is. We teach each other to change playmates, playpens, and playthings, because the brain all of a sudden will say, boom, and there it is. And at least in my experience, this has gone on most of my life since I've been sober. It is no longer an issue which makes me want to use. But my last amphetamine was 1969, and in 1991, before I retired from medicine to go in and to run the physician's health program in the state of Kentucky, I was in my office going through our sample room, and that's the way I used to get all my drugs. The ones I got was I'd go work in Moonlight, and I'd go in there, and I'd pull all their stuff off the cabinet. And when I got into practice, just had everybody send us samples. We had just truckloads of them. And that's the way it was. Well, I was in there doing this. We didn't have it then. The rules have changed. And all of a sudden, I didn't want the drug, but I knew what I was doing. My mind, my eyes were looking for that same drug. And that was 69, 79, 89, 22 years later. I just backed out of the room and called my partner and sat down. And I told him what happened. He said, are you really upset? And I said, no, just a little weird. He said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I prayed coming over here to sit down and talk to you. And now I'm going in there and call my sponsor. And I went in and called him. He said, are you thinking about using or drinking? I said, no, it just kind of blindsided me. 22 years later, it's never goes away. It is there. If I'm in fit spiritual condition, it's not intimidating, but it's still there. It will always be there. That moment when it changed, the world got quiet. I was focused. I felt no fear. It was just normal, I guess. It's the only time I was there. I don't know if that's normal or not, And I've certainly never forgotten it. Don't linger on it. Don't think about it, but never forgotten. I got took meth for 4 years, got kicked out of medical school 2 weeks before graduation. My senior year was in psychiatric therapy for 2 years, did not use any drugs, didn't drink at that time, just didn't drink. And that was the only drug I ever took. And for 2 years, I saw a psychiatrist in Louisville, a psychiatrist in Nashville. Felt great, reviewed all my records, and learned how to practice medicine in an unimpaired state, which was a great gift of God because I'd learned everything I knew about medicine on drugs. And so that gave me a chance to go back and do that. I didn't know that at the time, but I do today. Walked back into medical school, into the old hospital, and in less than an hour, I was strung out on amphetamine again and just sat there on the steps and cried. I didn't know what was wrong. It wasn't until I got to AA that there it is in the book. Psychiatry brought me knowledge, but they didn't bring me a spiritual solution. AA is not against knowledge, at least as I know it, but the only answer to the living problems for me is a spiritual solution. And psychiatry is not in their contract. It didn't bring me one. The thinking was if you name it and you see it and you understand where it comes from, then you won't have to do it. Well, that's just not true of us. And the book's pretty clear about that. My classmates enabled me. I graduated in 64, started my internship and residency, was interrupted 4 times. Over the next 3.5 years, I spent 2 of them in Our Lady of Peace at various intervals. Strapped down, IV fluids, straight jackets, padded cells, still didn't drink. Finished my residency, started my practice. The Vietnam War was raging, and I was pissed off at the Vietnam War. Either win it or get the hell out. And I'd get high on that stuff and sit in the doctor's lounge and just rave about it. One day, one of my friends said, if you don't like it, join. I thought, by God, that's a good idea. Went out and got in the car, drove to Frankfurt, joined the Army, didn't call my wife, didn't call my office, just joined the Army. Seemed like a good idea at the time, you know. Went in the Army. I was in charge of a small 3-doctor dispensary, and I could come out with handsfuls of amphetamine. Post commander came down the second year and said, Burns, are you taking all that amphetamine? I said, yes. And he said, if you don't quit, we'll have to court martial you. Once he explained it to me, I quit. Now, I could always quit drugs. There was a time coming when I couldn't quit drinking. It was impossible. I could always quit drugs. I'm not saying if I'd have stuck around longer, maybe. But I think 12 years and the ass whipping that I took was enough for me to make the statement that I could always quit taking drugs if you put a gun in my face and said, this is what's going to happen if you don't stop. Came home 1 year, didn't take any drugs. Came home, started my practice, got back on my drugs, had a gallbladder attack. Good friend of mine I went to medical school with took out my gallbladder. Another good friend I went to medical school with took care of me medically, and then we sat in Old Methodist Hospital and held hands and prayed that I'd quit taking amphetamine, and my last one was 1969. Then I started drinking. Now, I'm a card-carrying, commode-hugging, 12-gauge shotgun in the mouth, 2-quart of whiskey a night drunk. Alcoholic for you people who don't like the word drunk. But the first 12 years of my journey was one drug and no alcohol. The last 8 years of my journey was alcohol and no drug. And that story is worth telling to any room that'll listen, especially with the new age alcoholic drug addict. They are not like people. I was unique coming in the sense that I was, in that era, a drug addict alcoholic doctor. Even a drug addict alcoholic was rare. Today, virtually everybody is both. Of the new age alcohol, I know thousands of prisoners I've worked with. Literally thousands of people at the homeless shelter, the healing place that we started in 1990. Literally thousands. And I've done surveys for every 6 months. We're looking at about 3% of that population is either pure drug addict or pure alcoholic. The rest of them are polypharmacy, alcohol and drugs. We can ignore it as long as we want to ignore it, but it's a fact. I'm not preaching or saying what we should do about it. I'm just reporting. It is absolutely there. And my story, as a doctor, I can put all the formulas on the wall, addiction doctor, showing you this disease. I can also put all the formulas on showing you what cocaine does for reward, what alcohol does for reward, what marijuana does for reward, what benzodiazepines do for reward. Go right down the line, what heroin does for reward. I can put it all up there. And that final common pathway and payoff for all of them, except Valium, is to increase that same brain chemistry. The reward is the same. Delivery system is a little different, but the reward is the same to correct that abnormality in our brain chemistry. And that's what it is. But the rest of my story, to show you how it worked, amphetamine just kicked my ass and put me in a sewer. Then I started drinking. The first 5 years, man, I had a ball. It was wonderful. It was wonderful for a lot of reasons. It worked. I felt great, no problem. My first wife, finally, in 1975, when that started, I started drinking in 1969. In 75, she kicked me out of the house. I finally drank enough whiskey to embarrass her. I didn't run around on her. That wasn't my value structure. But I also did some stuff that they ought to put me in some sort of adolescent treatment center. You know, I mean, that's what I was. And she kicked me out. And that's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I was so freaking happy. She hated my guts. I hated her guts. We had sex together when I was a freshman and she was a freshman in college. We went to see our preachers and they said, well, y'all have had sex together. You need to get married. We can't afford to get married. Well, you got to stay together till you can't afford to get married. And that's the way it is. So that's what we did. We didn't even like each other. I'm telling you, I'm reporting we didn't. We spent 3 years of hating each other before we got married, and then 17 years of hating each other after we got married. And finally, I mean, we went to more family therapists than most people have ever been able to spell. And I'll tell you, when I look back on it, I didn't intend for those family therapists to help us. I didn't know it. I just wanted the hell out. But my conscience and my need for perfection wouldn't let me go. And I'm not sorry about that. I'm grateful for that conscience. And AA has made it a realistic set of values instead of where it was. But she kicked me out and I got me a white Corvette with a light blue leather interior and got me a light blue leisure suit and a quart of Chevy Regal whiskey and a sterling silver mint julep cup. And by God, I was the party. I'm here to tell you. And I got to tell you, prior to getting into that alcohol, prior to getting, I had some problems with performance anxiety and performance sexually. With that alcohol in me, I was fine. So I got to run around and womanize and had the best time in the world. I was a wonderful person to be with because I never abused anybody. I was just a nice person to be with. And I had a great time. And everybody else had a great time. Then I met Casey. We've been married. We were together 2.5 years, and we've been married 35. And I met her, and I knew she was the one. I'd never met any, and Liz knows her, and some other people know her, and she's just like she's been all of her life. And I tell you, this is one of the finest human beings that God ever made. I knew it then, I know it today. We drank together, drink for drink. She was 14 years younger than me. We had one date, moved in with each other to start off, make sure that everything worked out okay. Oh. Her daddy was bipolar, true bipolar, and her mother took care of her daddy, and my daddy took care of my mother, so I took care of Casey. Casey took care of me, and our disease is what kept us, put us together, and our hearts is what's has been what's kept us together. I've never loved anybody like I love her, then and now. And she can say the same thing about her relationship with me. It's just typically two human beings we went in to see a therapist yesterday because we finally decided that that we were not going to agree on shit. So we went in. Working the steps, we could be tolerant, loving, and all of that. But we just weren't going to agree on some issues that are important enough that we had to get a referee. So we went in to see a therapist. And we've seen him before. And after it's over, he said, 20 years ago we started this, and here y'all are 20 years later listening to the same crap. But anyhow, we hugged each other. We still do. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. Uh, I got sick and she didn't. And the last 2 years of my drinking, next to last year, was just trying to stay balanced. And the last year was survival drinking. And I was drinking 2 quarts of whiskey for that year. And I can start this story at this time about any time of the day, but I always started at 11 o'clock in the morning because that's when I'd wake up. I would be lying in a recliner. I didn't go to bed because I thought if I don't go to bed, I won't go to sleep. If I don't go to sleep, I won't wake up. If I don't wake up, the day won't start. If the day doesn't start, I won't have to go through this hell again. I would be laying in that recliner and she would come in crying and ask me to come to bed. And I'd say, I'm crazy. Get away from me. I'm going to drive you crazy. Just get away. And she'd be crying and go on in and go to bed. And I would have finished my whiskey by that time and I would go on off. I don't know, pass out, whatever I did. Then I'd get up at 11 in the morning. She'd be gone to work. I'd take a Valium, stop shaking. I'd race out to the hospital. I would make my rounds. Then I'd go over and see my patients in the office. I would do in about 2.5 hours, 2 to 2.5 hours, what it normally took me 8 to 9 hours to do. In that last 6 months, I became a highly trained technician. I had ceased to be a doctor, at least the doctor that I wanted to be, and thought that and think and was. And that was just tearing my guts out. And when I came back from treatment, my partner and I reviewed all of my charts for 5 years because I was scared I'd hurt somebody. My charts would have all passed quality assurance and did. But I knew I wasn't a doctor. I knew that when I walked in that office, my nurse would have already taken the history. I would pull the chart out, read the history, walk into the room, not say a word, order my test, get the test in, read the EKGs, chest x-rays, blood tests, whatever it may have been, write out my diagnosis, write out the prescriptions if we didn't admit them to the hospital, give them to the nurse, and go on to the next patient. I was a family doc, and for the first 2 years of practicing medicine, I delivered babies. So I delivered a lot of those people. I buried a lot of their parents and their grandparents. So they loved me, and they didn't say anything. Most of them, as I came to know when I came back from treatment, knew that I had a drinking problem. And they were probably happier than my mother and daddy even that I'd quit drinking. But they loved me, and I loved them, and this was tearing me apart. I'd come home right after. I had to get home. I was going into DTs, and I knew I had about 2 hours before I did. And I would race home. Casey would come home early, fix me a broiled steak and baked potato to protect my liver because I couldn't quit. I'd even quit trying to quit. I would sit down with my 2 records, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra, doing the Battle of the Hymn of the Republic. My eyes have seen the glory of the God. And I just cry. And I still play it and cry. It's a great song. Different Tears. My second record was Neil Diamond's I Am, I Said. And my hero's talking to a chair. Neil had a lot of trouble in the 70s. But in that one particular song, he says, I've got an emptiness deep inside and it won't let me go. I'm not a man who liked to swear, but I never cared for the sound of being alone. And that was where I was. And you know it. Maybe your history is not reflected in this, but if you read the first 2 pages of A Vision for You, that's where I was. I go back and read it just to cry and to feel the relief that I'm not there anymore, because that's where I was. Brilliant, brilliant writing in those first 2 pages of A Vision for You for the alcoholic who has reached the end. And that's where it was. That morning, I woke up, she was gone to work, and I knew it was over. I knew it was over. I'd had 9 years of psychiatric therapy. I'd been deacon in 5 churches, drinking 2 quarts of whiskey a day or a night, and I didn't have a clue how to stop. Never heard of AA, but I knew it was over. I asked God to help me, and I knew immediately what I had to do. Went back in the bedroom, got a 12-gauge shotgun, sat down on the edge of the bed, put the gun in my mouth, and I was going home. I believed in God. God lived on a cloud, looked like Charlton Heston, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and Santa Claus. And I mean, as soon but I believed in it. What they kept drilling me when I was a kid in Baptist Sunday school was God is love, and I believed it then. I believe it now. I'm completely convicted, was then, and even more so today, that God is love. Now, I can't draw you a picture, and I can't write you a paragraph, but I know my relationship with the growing insight that I have into the God of my understanding that has come through Alcoholics Anonymous. But that's how it started. You know, Wilson writes in A Vision for You, writes in the Family Apple. He said, those of us who have spent much time in the world of spiritual make-believe have eventually recognized the childishness of it. This has been replaced by a great sense of purpose. What's our purpose? To fit ourselves to be of maximum service. Isn't that what the 8th and 9th step tells us in chapter 6? To fit ourselves to be of maximum service. We can't give away what we don't have. We fit ourselves. We don't be of maximum. We fit ourselves to be of maximum service. It's been replaced by a great sense of purpose and an ever-growing awareness of the presence of God and the power of God in our lives. God wants us to have our head in the clouds with Him, but our feet must be firmly planted on earth. That's where our fellow travelers are, and that's where our work is to be done. Liz call, I'm here. A lot of it was just exactly what I've said, but most of it was, I feel good. I have no problems. They're asking me to do something for AA, and I'm going. And I'm going. I mean, that's the whole bit. I sit on the side of that bed and I said, God, if you don't want me to pull this trigger, you better give me a reason. Mom and Dad will be better off without me. Casey will be better off without me. My patients will be better off without me. And I got to my children. Now, Libby's been in AA 32 years. She came in when she was 20. Burns Jr. has been in 30 years. He came in when he was 17. They neither had the need to go back out. Neither of them are speaking to me. But that's just the joy of interhuman relationships. I don't know why they're mad at me. I've done my inventory, talked to my sponsor, done everything, talked to them. And I finally decided that, do I love them? With all my heart. Will I give them everything I got? Yeah, except my money, because they don't need it. And they both want my money. And I told them I wasn't going to give it to them. So they don't talk to me. And I'm going to give them one last shot right before I die and send them a letter. You better come here and talk to my ass, because I'm going to die and you ain't going to get my money then either. But they're both sober. They're both raising their family, and the program is deep in their hearts. I don't know what they have in inventory about me, but I can't find anything that I've done. And I swear to God, I've checked with everybody that knows the situation. So I sit there and I said, they weren't in the program then. And I sat there and I said, my children would be better off without me. And then I stopped. And I'd been in practice about 8 years, and I'd seen people come in impaled on a spear of why did daddy kill himself? Why did mama kill herself? You know, the whole deal. What had they done wrong? Either they didn't love me enough, or I didn't do right by them. And I thought, if I pull this trigger, those children will never know that daddy loved them. They'll always wonder. It was 12 years after I got into AA, and I was within about 4 days of getting there, sitting there on that bed that morning. I was getting ready to go to treatment after this happened. It was 12 years into the program when I got into the book and went through the process and had to realize the spiritual experience that I had at that time. I asked God to help me, and He had me think of another human being. He sent me to think of somebody else. The other thing that I realized was a major, major, major event in my life At that point in time, the pain I would cause those children meant more to me than the relief of my own pain. You hear what I'm saying? If everybody that's in this program, most of the young ones I'm talking to, you get to the point that that is a driving force in your life and you're ready to do the drill to get in fit spiritual condition, let me tell you, all relapses will stop. There won't be any. Because that's the conversion from total self-centeredness to the spiritual position of giving a damn about somebody else. I've never worked with somebody that's relapsed, and I've worked with hundreds. That at the moment of relapse, yeah, they quit going to meetings. Yeah, they took over the command of their own lives by trying to run their own lives. You can go through any drill you want to go through. But the bottom line is they cared so damn much about themselves, they couldn't think about anybody else. And the same is true when we quit. No, sure, I got to be here for myself. Eventually, I want to stay clean and be in God's army. For me, that's where I think I'm most effective. But I'll tell you, when I put that gun down, it was because I did not want to hurt them anymore. It was over. It was over. The terror came back. I called a good friend of mine who was in medical school with me at that was about 11, about noon. And I said, David, I'm at the end of my drinking. I just put the shotgun down. Can I come and see you? And he said, sure. I went directly up there to see him in his office, and I walked in. This was David Brown. I walked into his office, and I said, David, you tell me what to do. I'll do anything you tell me to do. My first higher power that I could feel, touch, and smell was 5'9", wore glasses, and stuttered. But I turned my life and will over to him with no reservations. He sent me to treatment. I turned my life and my will over to the guy who ran the treatment center for 4 months. I came home, got a sponsor immediately, turned my life and my will over to him. I mean, turned it over. I'd call him 4, 5, and 6 times a day. Bill Wilson described in his story what eventually came to be known in medical science as the post-acute withdrawal syndrome. Bill Wilson had Swiss cheese for brains for a year and a half. He said for a year and a half he couldn't get a job because he was racked with waves of self-pity and resentment. Mine was just abject confusion. Mine was characterized by a loss of antegrade short-term memory. Retrograde, if you know how to ride a bicycle, you can ride it. I knew how to practice medicine, so I could practice medicine. I couldn't find my damn car in the parking lot. I'd read the Kerr Journal and couldn't remember what it said. I'd read my morning meditation. That was so beautiful. Close the book and just sob because I couldn't remember a bit of it. Sleep patterns screwed up for 6 months to 2 years. Now, we're talking about adult alcoholics. Adolescent alcoholics are different. Wilson says in the big book, the best medical books ever been written about alcoholism, we just juiced it up with a lot of terms in our scientific literature. He said young people will drink differently from older people. Today, with what we know about the human genome and science, they have a different genetic background. They don't drink the same way. Commonality is none of us can drink at all. But they present entirely different. So they don't go through that brain leaching. The drugs bring a complication to that, but just from drinking. But the drinkers, usually starting at age 25 on, we go through that based on how much we've been drinking and how long we've been drinking. And man, I took a brain in there that you could have, if you just looked through my ears, you could have put light all the way through the wall right over there. And by God, that's the way it was. I would be going between examining rooms and I'd be finding the examiner and come out and stand in the hall and all of a sudden just start crying. I would sit down in the hall and my nurses would be sitting there talking to me and they'd be taking patients back and they'd come by looking at me down there on the floor, you know. And then I'd go in the room and they'd say, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. You're not drinking, are you? No, I'm not drinking. Okay, here's what's wrong with me. Here we go, Then I'd go over across as soon as I finished, or even before I went in there, go across the hall, pick up the phone. Jim, yeah, I'm flying apart. Okay, did you get up on time? Yeah. Did you eat your breakfast? Yeah. Did you do your meditation? Yeah. Seeing the patients on time? Yeah. Did you eat your lunch? Yeah. You coming to the meeting now? Yeah. You'll be okay. Thanks, Jim. Hang on. This is an absolute true story. I'm not embellishing it. 15 minutes later or 2 hours later, Jim, I'm flying apart. Did you get up on time? Yeah. Did you eat your breakfast? Yeah. Did you do your meditation? That's the same shit, different time. And we went through that 5, 6, and 7 times a day. I mean, so much humor came out of that time. Today, it wasn't humorous then. I mean, I'd call him at night and I'd say, Jim, I can't sleep. By this time, Casey and I were together. And he'd say, is Casey in bed yet? I'd say, yeah. And he says, ask her if she'll have sex with you. I'd say, Casey, will you have sex with me? I can't sleep. She said, yeah. I said, she said, yeah, Jim, well, go ahead if it doesn't work on. Yeah. And I'd hang up, we'd have sex, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And I'd call him back. He'd say, well, go in there and, and warm up a glass of milk. And I'd warm up my milk and I'd drink my milk. And he said, call me back if that doesn't work. And I called him back. He'd say, well, let's pray together. Sometimes he'd start off, but let's pray together. Finally, after about 6 months of this, he said, if you call me one more time, I'll whip your. He said, did it ever occur to you? I don't give a damn whether you sleep or not. I tell you, this is what that was not funny at the time. Today, it's hilarious. Fellowship was wonderful. That whole deal happened, and we were going along, but we never read the book. Jim didn't get us into the book. Fellowship was indescribably wonderful. Casey fit right here on my hip. She quit drinking. When I quit drinking, she went to Al-Anon. She fit right on my hip. We went to meetings together with Mo at times, and Casey was right there with me going to open meetings. Finally, she heard her story at a women's retreat, got into AA. Bonnie was her sponsor, and Bonnie said to her, and I love Bonnie. Bonnie said, "Do you want to be Burns's wife for the rest of your life? Is that all you want? And that's fine. You want to raise his children? That's fine. Is there anything you want to do?" And she said, "Yeah, I'd like to be a therapist." She only had 1 year of college. Bonnie said, well, why don't you go talk to Vernon? So she came and sat down. But this time we'd been together about 7 or 8 years. She came and sat down with me and said, I want to go back to school. And I said, I think that's a great idea. About a month after she got back to school, I thought it sucked. And I mean big time. Because when I came home growing up, Mama, I didn't know this. Mama would have the lights on, everything would be fine, my food would be set, the house would be warm, it would be perfect. I'd come home, no lights on. Before Casey went to school, they're all there, no lights on, nothing. I mean, I was pissed. And she was at U of L, and I thought Casey was 14 years younger, good looking gal, and I thought some young sted's going to take my woman. And I was full of fear. I'd tell Jim, he'd say pray, but he didn't tell me how to pray or what to do. We weren't in the steps. Then I decided I was just completely resentful about this whole deal. And I said, I'm resentful. He said, well, pray for her. But he didn't tell me how. Big Book tells us exactly in the 4-step prayer how to pray, doesn't it? We tell each other, just pray. Didn't work for me until I learned how to pray, just like the book teaches me to pray. And that will take away the resentment it has for me. Then I went back to fear because I thought, no, Casey's stylish. She won't run away from me, but somebody's going to drag her off in the bushes and cut her up. And I thought, oh, shit, man, I was in horror. I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to take drugs. I had plenty of money. I had all kinds of prestige. I had all sorts of stuff. But what would be the next thing I would go to? Sex. We each had nurses in my practice. There was a nurse that worked with me. She was divorced, had 2 small children, wonderful lady. And she'd been there 5 years, and all of a sudden she began to be the best looking woman I'd ever seen in my life. I noticed that she smelled better than anybody I'd ever smelled. And she had the prettiest hands when she would point something out to me, on the chart. And all this began to just in my mind. So I had an affair for 3 months. Didn't tell my sponsors. The first thing I never told my sponsor, because I knew what he would say. I didn't want to hear that. But it wasn't one of those things. The peculiar mental twist in me doesn't just stop with chicken shit stuff. Oh, no. I was going to divorce Casey, give her all of my money so she would be okay, and I'd take care of my conscience. Then Kathy, who is a nurse, she and I will go to seminary, become a medical missionary. We'll be able to treat patients because she's a nurse and I'm a doctor, and we'll go to Bolivia and straighten out the whole damn country of Bolivia. That's where we were going. I'm not embellishing this, troops. I'm telling you the story. 3 months into this deal, I'm driving back from her house and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm dead. You know, I'm lying. I got a secret. And we read every night, if you're lying, you got a secret. In essence, you're going to get drunk. And I thought, why do I think I'm different? And I called my sponsor that night going home. I said, Jim, here's what I'm doing. And he said, quit. I said, okay. And by the time I got home, he called Casey and told her. Now, I learned a lot from that. I learned this is a perfect program composed of a lot of screwed up people. And you're looking at one. If you haven't figured that out, but tonight, man, you just asleep. That's all I can tell you. And every one of us are right on the edge of a hysterical insanity. But the program is perfect. Sponsors are not God. I made him a God. Sponsors are angels. Anybody that asks me to sponsor me, if I do it, I say, man, if you expect me to walk on water, you better tell me where the stumps are. We're going to learn together. We're going to share each other. I got more to share probably, but you got a lot to give and a lot to share. And we're going to travel this journey, but don't expect me to be perfect. It just is not within what I am. And that was the deal. We went to a therapist. About that time, a little sponsee of mine, I said, God, I don't know what to do. Jim's always giving me my answers. What do I do? And a little sponsee came up with 8 tapes. They were Joe and Charlie's tapes of the big book. I took those tapes. I listened to them, cried all the way through. That 12-step program had 11 copies made. And all the guys you would know sat down. We did our big book study together and did our steps. That was the second big book study in Louisville. And today there are 40 or 50 in Louisville that grew out of that. And my particular position is my whole life changed because I became a devout follower and doer of the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous. Wilson is real clear. This one man with this book in his hand. That's what he says in the Vision for You. Our unity, in my opinion, and I've been around this country a number of times, Wilson was terrified we would lose it. He mostly believed the threat was drugs. I am not saying it's not. What I am telling you is what I see is the threat to our unity. And in this room, I don't think it's here, but only y'all know. I'm basing that on what I've heard in people giving away these medallions tonight. The biggest threat to our unity is a garbled message. When Wilson wrote the big book, he wrote it for a lot of grandiose ideas. If you're a student of AA, and you know he did. But the one he always said was the main reason is so the message wouldn't get garbled. And you come to Louisville and you go to 4 meetings. If you don't hear at least 2 to 3 different messages, then I will almost kiss your forehead. I mean, it is incredible the number of messages that you can hear, some from multiple sources, and it's irrelevant what the sources are. I'm absolutely positive from my experience, and now it's huge. I'm involved in at least 6 big book studies a week, 4 of which I lead, 2 of which I attend, in addition to the other meetings that I go to. I don't travel much and talk anymore. My talking days are over. There are young studs running around and young women running around who have great stories to tell with a lot more energy than I've got. My day is over there, but it's not over in my community and big book studies. That will be, it has to be the salvation of the unity of Alcoholics Anonymous. We will change. Wilson said we would. He said this program must and will change. He didn't say how. But there's no doubt in my mind as I have watched the revelation and the evolution of this program, we must get back to the fundamentals of the message. And that's the only thing we've got to give away. which will go to the next person and the next person. Where am I today? I get up in the morning, read On Awakening from the 11th step. Then I do the first step, the second step, the third step prayer, the 7th step prayer. That's how I establish my spiritual condition. The minute I leave the house, I lead my life by the first paragraph of the 10th step. And you read it. Continue to watch for self-centeredness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. What do? We ask God to remove it. We talk to somebody. We make our amends if indicated, and we help somebody. Also, at the end of that step, it says, how can I best serve thee? This is a thought which must go with us every day. I said it coming up here. I've said it in this room a number of times. I've said it in this talk a number of times. How can I best serve thee? Maybe I didn't do the best job I could do. Maybe I did a job better than I've ever done before. It's irrelevant. The main part that is relevant is I ask, how can I best serve thee? When I go home tonight, I will, in my car, do another 10-step inventory. Every time I move from one location to another throughout the day, I do the first paragraph of the 10th step. That maintains my spiritual condition. When I get home tonight, I'll do the 11th step on retiring. And if I come up with some people that I haven't been kind and loving to, I will get up out of that bed. I've got a legal pad beside my bed, and I will write their name down. And when I get up in the morning, I'll call Luke and I'll say, Luke, here we are. Do I owe an amends? I think I do. What do you think? He'll say, well, what have you looked at? Except when to do so would injure them or others. All right. Do you think it will? No. You feel like you need to do it? Yeah. Then you go do it. And I start in the morning cleaning up the end of the day so that I don't find it necessary to take a drink 6 months from now because I didn't clean up today. It's not rocket science. Wilson said this program is simple but not easy. It requires the destruction of self-centeredness. You are a part of the army that I have so embraced to travel with. I'm so grateful that you asked me to come up here because I really wanted to come. It has been everything that I thought it would be. I'm so grateful to see the people that I've come to love, miss the ones that I miss. And those of you I'll never get a chance to talk to on this side of the river, have a great journey. I love you very much.